authority of the Council, I shall now confer the degree of Doctor of the University. I call upon the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Glyn Davis, to read the citation.
Acting Chancellor, the Council of the University has resolved to award the degree of Doctor of the University to James Morrison, AM. James Morrison was born in 1962 in Wurrara, in New South Wales. His interest in music started at an early age. Although his first notes were played on piano, using the familiar children's starter book, John Thompson's Piano Method, he was only halfway through the book when he decided he didn't want to do it, he didn't like the songs. He preferred the clatter and the bang of classroom percussion. He joined the school band, and at the age of 7, he was given his first instrument, a cornet. At 9, he formed his first band, and at 13, he was playing professionally in nightclubs. After leaving school, he enrolled at the New South Wales Conservatorium of Music and completed an Associate Diploma of Jazz. Soon after graduating, he was appointed lecturer at the Conservatorium. While still studying, James Morrison's international career was launched. Having just turned 16, he debuted in the United States with a breathtaking concert at the Monterey Jazz Festival. In 1979, he was invited to join Don Burrow's band and toured Australia and Southeast Asia for the next 6 years. In 1983, he formed the Morrison Brothers Big Band. Big Bad Band, it says on these notes, which is more worrying, with his brother John, a gifted drummer. James Morrison's reputation preceded him as he became more and more popular, and he was soon asked to play at every A-list function in Australia. In many ways, James was responsible for the rebirth of jazz in Australia, taking it to a far wider audience than before. James Morrison later toured the world, receiving international acclaim. In 1987, he became the first Australian to perform with Dizzy Gillespie at the Montreux Jazz Festival, and 2 years later, he joined the Philip Morris Big Band World Tour. He has appeared internationally, including many big festivals in Europe, in the North Sea, in Nice and Bern. He performed both with his own group and as a soloist, alongside some of the legends of jazz, including Wynton Marsalis, Frank Sinatra, Cab Calloway, Woody Shaw, Red Rodney, George Benson, Ray Charles, and blues legend B.B. King. There were also performances in the world's most famous jazz clubs, the Blue Note and Village Vanguard in New York, the New Morning in Paris, and Ronnie Scott's in London. From 1992 to 1994, James Morrison headlined a critically acclaimed world tour with the Ray Brown Trio that covered Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Switzerland, Malaysia, France, Belgium, Austria, Sweden, Finland, and Germany. James Morrison's career has thus been more diverse and is perhaps not typical of many jazz musicians. He recorded Jazz Meets the Symphony with the London Symphony Orchestra, as well as performing in concerts at the Royal Albert Hall with the London Philharmonic Orchestra and at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden for Princess Anne. His career has also included Royal Command performances on 2 occasions for Queen Elizabeth II and performances for US Presidents George Bush, that's George Bush the father, and Bill Clinton at Parliament House in Australia. In 2000, he was commissioned to compose and perform the opening fanfare of the Sydney Olympic Games. James Morrison's national and international reputation continues to grow. In recent years, he's played to a sellout crowd at the Hollywood Bowl and has contributed to concerts with the Auckland Philharmonic Orchestra and in Tel Aviv with the Israeli National Orchestra. Other significant events include concerts in Barcelona, Toronto, South Africa, Berlin, and New Year's Eve 2000 in Tokyo with Ray Brown's Trumpet Summit. Known predominantly as a trumpet player, James Morrison is being recognised today as one of the most accomplished multi-instrumentalists in the world. Beside the trumpet, he plays trombone, euphonium, flugelhorn, tuba, saxophone, and piano. Truly frightening. Apart from touring the world for most of the year, he's also the head of Morrison Records, an independent label dedicated to the best of jazz. An avid user of the latest technologies, he is very involved in furthering the presence of jazz and music education on the internet, and also uses computers extensively in his writing, his recording, and his performances. James Morrison is also deeply committed to the educational needs of the music industry. He is the patron of 6 youth bands across Australia, and he provides a yearly scholarship to further the musical education of young Australians. When not writing film scores, composing, or being patron of youth orchestras, he relaxes in some fairly unconventional ways for a musician, competing in triathlons, abseiling, flying his private plane, or driving in a rally championship. His talent, his contributions to music have been recognised in many ways, including the Moe Award as Australian Performer of the Year in 1990 and the Ricky May Performer of the Year Award. In 1997, he was made a member of the Order of Australia for his outstanding service to the arts in Australia. It is fitting that Griffith University should honour James Morrison in recognition of his distinguished contributions to the arts and to the community. Acting Chancellor, it is with the greatest pleasure that I present to you James Morrison AM for admission to the degree of Doctor of the University.
Ladies and gentlemen, there will now be a brief musical interlude performed by Mr. James Morrison AM, accompanied by the students of the Queensland Conservatorium.
I think James could start a whole new trend in terms of dressing for performance. I think this is the first occasion I've seen such dress for a musical interlude. I'm filibustering here to give James a couple of minutes to recover before I call upon him to deliver the occasional address. It's not often you can capture James playing for us and also addressing us. So we're doubly grateful, I think, for James being here this evening. I now call upon James Morrison, AM, Doctor of the University, to deliver the occasional address.
Thank you very much, Acting Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, distinguished guests, graduates, and ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honour and a great pleasure to be here standing tonight as a Doctor of the University speaking to you. It's a wonderful thing. I'd like to just go back briefly a couple of years to when I was about 3 years old, and my earliest musical recollections. It's funny, the wonderful citation that was read there, all those wonderful things I wanted to meet me myself. But it started with the piano at about the age of 6. But in actual fact, my earliest musical recollection goes back further. My father is a preacher, and so Sundays we could be found, of course, in church. Mum played the organ, and I'm pretty sure this was not at Burrawa where I was born, but at Blaney, the next place we went to, another country town in New South Wales. Can't be certain, but I know the organ there wasn't one you plugged into the power. I'm pretty sure we had power, but the organ was, I think they're known as a harmonium. You pedal it, and that's how it makes the sound, the bellows inside from pedalling. So Mum could be seen Sunday mornings pedalling away on the organ and playing. Now my brother and I, John and I, had to be minded by someone. We were too young at this stage to be in the church choir. That came later, and the choir was never the same again. But at this stage, who could possibly mind us? Dad's behind the pulpit, Mum's on the organ, so we sat next to Mum on the organ stool at least some of the time. And John would sit one side and I'd sit the other, and Mum would play. Now, of course, boys will be boys, and we'd want to get up to mischief. I have to say, Mum had a particular technique that I'll never forget for playing the organ. She'd be pedalling away with both feet, playing with both hands, and turning the pages on the music. You know, those hymn books have that very, very fine paper that sticks together. So you need to lick your finger before you turn it. This is important stuff. So Mum's playing with both hands and manages at the end of each page to go and turn the page without missing any notes. Now I can't even do it like this, but she did it. Impressive as that is, it's nothing compared to what was to come. They had those stops on the organ that you pull out for the different sounds, and Mum would have them set a certain way. And of course what John and I wanted to do was to move them. And especially push them in and stop the sound. That's very funny. So Mum developed a technique, and I kid you not, for playing with 2 feet and 2 hands, and then when we would reach out to move one of the stops, she would be able to go like that without missing any notes. Now at this point you're thinking that's pretty good, right? But it gets better. What we very quickly learned, because kids, let's face it, are very fast. I have 3 small boys myself now. They're very fast at learning, watching and working out how to make the most mischief. And we worked out, obvious, you wait for the page turn. And so Mum's playing with both feet, both hands, comes up to a page turn, and we all knew it was going to happen, comes up to the page turn and goes like this, and she was able, without missing a note, to go like this and go, and keep playing. It was quite incredible. It's probably no surprise I play the way I do today, because my earliest musical recollections are mixed with violence. But I do remember quite seriously those harmonies, those chords, and being, even at that stage, I didn't realise it, but later on I could hark back to it, the feeling that you got from being amongst music. And from that age of 6 or 7, when I started to play myself, I never looked back from what it felt like to play music. And after my first solo performance, which was the age of 8, what it was like to perform music for people. And it was inspiring for me, and thankfully inspiring for the people listening. And I guess all I wanted to say today was that inspiration that music brings to all of us, both performer and the listener, is really for me what it's all about, and really such an amazing thing. And sometimes we can lose sight of that in our pursuit of excellence as musicians, particularly because we're the ones doing the playing, that is really what it's all about. And that music is such an amazing force and such a wonderful thing. And just touching on what the acting Chancellor said about perhaps not always recognised right away as something vital to the community in terms of dollars and cents, but extremely vital to our well-being and to the richness of our lives. Have you ever watched a movie without the music? It just doesn't work. And I don't think this movie of life does either without music. Many years later, I was on tour with a fabulous band of legends of jazz in the band, every one of them. And they were all much older than myself. I was in my mid to late 20s, so it's nearly 2 or 3 years ago now. And we were a big band with Ray Charles singing with the band. I mean, you need a singer for your band? Get Ray Charles. It was a fabulous tour. B.B. King was also there, right around the world. And of course, inevitably, there were press conferences along the way. And the tour promoter grabbed a handful of stars and myself for this press conference. He said, well, have so-and-so, could you come? And he said, and you come along too. Kind of like, let's have the sort of token, young guy in the band. But no one knows. And we were sitting there, and the press sat opposite us and asked questions of whomever they wanted. And of course, it was all to these stars either side of me, understandably. And at one point, towards the end of the press conference, one of the reporters looked at me and said, and looked at my name tag to work it out and said, "Mr. Morrison," he said, "what are you doing here?" It was a blunt question, but a good one. What are you doing here? Why are you sitting next to people like Ray Charles, B.B. King, Ray Brown, Harry Sweets Edison on the trumpet? What are you doing here? And Harry Sweets Edison was the one, sadly no longer with us now, but at the time he was 76, and turned and looked at me. He had a huge cigar and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I was on the spot, and this is what I said, and it's so true. I said, "Well, once upon a time, Mr. Edison here, Mr. Charles, they were the young guys, and they were being inspired by the great musicians of their day. And that greatness, some of it rubbed off, and the music certainly did, and they took it with them. And when their predecessors were gone, they carried it on. And I'm here because sadly one day all these gentlemen won't be, and someone's got to keep playing the music. And one day I'll be one of the old guys, and there'll be some young guy sitting here, and hopefully we can put him on the spot and say, 'What are you doing here?' And the answer was, what was I doing there? And something that is in front of all of you, sometimes when you don't even know it, is inspiration. Music and inspiration.